A new Paper Mario survey has dropped from the sky, and, as I did with the pre-release questionnaire, I thought it would be worth going through and looking at the specifics. There is a lot here, including some questions which are fairly standard, but there are a few questions which are very The Thousand Year Door specific and, taken together, give a picture of the direction of travel of Nintendo's thinking. The screenshots will be on screen for your reference. So first it asks for country of residence, suggesting that this poll is not being run in the USA. I'd say this is Nintendo of Europe's equivalent to what NOA did, except that it also includes Australia and New Zealand. I guess America and Canada may contract their own research teams at a different point. Then there are the standard demographic questions used for weighting, including gender, age, people in household, and when you first got a Nintendo Switch in the household. I can't remember if previous surveys have asked this specific question, but it occurs to me that they're going to be probing to find early adopters, since in the not too distant future, early adopters are going to be the people they're targeting for the next Nintendo console. Why might it be a benefit on this particular survey, and how does it relate to Paper Mario? At a stretch, and I concede it as a stretch, data mining reportedly suggests that the Thousand Year Door has the capacity to output a 4K image if only the Switch were able to actually produce such an image, suggesting that the game is at least a little prepared for release on a new system. Now, if Nintendo knows who their early adopters are, this could be something that they play up in their advertising, but it's probably less beneficial doing so if the Thousand Year Door fans aren't usually the sort of people who buy hardware early. This could also be used to cut through noise. In data collection terms, the Thousand Year Door has to be a noisy game. Fans literally are making noise in terms of campaigns, and people's love for the game will be split between new players and those who are buying the game mainly out of nostalgia. Therefore, this question helps to disaggregate people's honest reactions in the moment from those more hardcore gamers swept up in the hype. Now, it's possible that this survey takes some different pathways and that I may not have seen all of the questions. Evidently, I said yes, I own and have played this game already, but I would be interested to see if anybody hasn't played the game and has taken the questionnaire, whether or not they get different types of questions. Nintendo also asks specifically about gaming and role-playing games, and I think this, more than anything, speaks to the idea that they are looking to test the popularity of RPG mechanics specifically after a series of Paper Mario entries which wore the RPG elements rather lightly. I wonder if there's a bit of a generational shift as well. When the Thousand Year Door came out, RPGs still had a reputation for being difficult and a little bit niche, and that was despite the Final Fantasy games being pretty much at their zenith in the few years after Final Fantasy VII. But now so many games have stories, so many games have role-playing elements. It will be interesting to know if and how gamers' tastes have changed over the years, but I haven't been able to find any hard data at the present time. They also then query whether people have played the original title. As well as being a way to filter survey responses again by nostalgia, this may also be of use to them in figuring out what the reception is to re-release titles and who is buying them. Are people double dipping, which obviously has big consequences for the kind of games they want to put on NSO, or are the audiences mostly separate, in which case theoretically there's a metric ton of games they could release as new. Nintendo has always relied heavily on ports and remakes. If you think the Switch is lousy with them, take a glance at the Game Boy Advance library sometime. So I don't think the answer to this survey will be hugely consequential, but it never hurts for them to be able to put some data behind their decisions. This chimes in with the next question as well, which asks about which games you have played from the Mario RPG series. Note the inclusion of the Mario and Luigi titles. Reviving that series, of course, is not without complexity, as developers Alpha Dream went to the wall in 2019, but a lot of their staff are still in the orbit of Nintendo. A good number ended up at Monolith Soft and are credited on games such as Tears of the Kingdom. But Mario and Luigi is a rich seam of titles for potential re-release. That said, they've already started putting them on NSO, so if they do want to capitalise on those titles, they're going to need to hurry. Is there an outside chance of a Mario and Luigi port before the dawn of this new system? They might be cautious of another Mario and Luigi Bowser's Inside Story on 3DS situation, where a Mario and Luigi RPG releases so late in the lifespan of a system that it dies horribly, with sales plunging to almost unheard of depths for a Mario game. But still, we're in a very different situation here, and if the success of Super Mario RPG made them see the potential in Mario role-playing titles, I could see them prioritising a cheap and cheerful remake or remaster of a prior title for release in 2025. The next question contextualises which other Mario games people have played, and I think it's interesting how Nintendo categorises them. No separate option for Mario Sports, or puzzle titles like Mario vs. Donkey Kong or even Dr. Mario. They've kept it to 4 main buckets: 3D, 2D, other Mario titles, of which the examples they give are essentially all party games if you count Kart as being a sort of party experience as purist, and then spin-off titles. I think it's really interesting they've limited themselves to 4 options when you see how granular they get with some of the later questions, and so I guess at this point they aren't too bothered in seeing any particular detail of how Paper Mario fans correlate with other Mario titles' fan bases. Then the question, which is clearly geared to advertisers: how did you receive the game? I.e., who do we need to be marketing towards, which is a fair enough question. But then we get the question on social media, and we have to ask, is this where Arlo needs to come and take a bow for his Remaster Thousand Year Door campaign? I'd love to think so, if only because we need to get the internet working on more Advance Wars. Advance Wars. Of course, given this is probably an advertising firm, or at least a marketing wing of a department at Nintendo that are asking these questions, I guess it makes sense that they're less interested in the types of Mario games people are playing, as opposed to where people are getting their information. It also asks you to list which source of information out of all of the many they list spiked your interest in Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door the most. And again, I guess this is a way of judging which avenue of advertising is going to have the biggest impact. Then there's an open-ended question on why it's right for you. Why is this game the one that you particularly picked? And here it seems they're hunting for copy for subsequent campaigns, as they later ask to use some of these responses. It's interesting that they left this question open though, and although I feel like I've seen this type of question elsewhere from Nintendo, it is a question that gets to the heart of the Thousand Year Door's unique appeal, if indeed the sales figures and data bear out that it has a unique appeal and isn't just a nostalgia bubble. Now, after an open question which allows you to put down any reason you like, the next question does ask you to narrow down to some specific pre-chosen reasons, but clearly they put this list afterwards so as not to risk prompting the reader first off. You can pick up to 3 reasons from quite a long list, and let's just read them here and take particular note of the one that comes first. The Super Mario Bros. Movie made me curious to play a game with characters from the Mario franchise. Now, look, these aren't particularly sequential, any of these choices. Any of them could have come first. So why the movie question? Why did that come first? Well, I think we might discuss this in a separate video, but for now let's look at what else we've got. It received good reviews. I wanted to try a role-playing game that is less serious and more accessible than other games of the genre. I wanted to play the newest Mario game. I played the original game on Nintendo GameCube and liked it. I heard that many people liked the original game and I wanted to catch up on it. I was intrigued by the game's exciting adventure and its interesting story. It looked like a game full of humour and funny twists. I heard a lot of good things about it from gaming websites or online forums. I wanted to play a Mario game that feels different compared to other Mario games that I've played. I was intrigued by the look of the game with its diverse characters and colourful worlds. Many people were talking and getting excited about it, and it was recommended to me by a friend or family member. And of course there is the option to put your own choice in all the same. Okay, so now we're getting into what I consider to be the really interesting questions, as they ask how far in you are into the game. Now I've just finished chapter 3, so I put chapter 4 further, and I don't know whether the kinds of questions asked going forward would vary depending on the responses people give. So again, I'd be very interested to hear if people have taken the questionnaire and given different responses. The next questions that follow are fairly standard, what you like and dislike, and again, they're clearly looking for advertising copy, as they put up a legal disclaimer after to say they'll use your answer in their future advertising. I guess they won't mention the dislikes, but you have to wonder whether the dislikes will be fed back to Japan or whether they'll just be used to know which areas not to focus on in advertising. Then we get a question which focuses on the specific features that people are enjoying. And again, let's just have a read through. The options are the turn-based battles without time limit, Mario transforming into a paper plane or a paper ship to overcome obstacles, the general art style and design, the improved graphics, unique friends and foes that you don't see in any other Mario game, the game's re-orchestrated soundtrack, battles being staged like a theatre play with the audience or parts of the stage influencing the course of battle, the various action commands that require well-timed button inputs, gaining experience from battles and leveling up just like in classic RPGs, travelling and fighting alongside unique companions like Goombella, Koops, etc. The humour of the game, exploring the various worlds and finding hidden secrets. The unique overworld actions of Mario's companions that help you explore the environment. The story about Mario collecting the crystal stars by fulfilling unique and distinct quests in each chapter. These small episodes after finishing a chapter in which you play as Bowser or Peach. Equipping badges that improve your party's stats or let Mario perform special attacks, and the pipe room beneath Rogueport that enables fast travel to already visited locations, or of course you can put none of these. Now these are quite specific in nature and perhaps given general hints as to the kinds of features they would consider putting in future titles. In particular, I think it's fun that they picked up on the Peach and Bowser interstitial episodes, and the comment about friends and foes you don't see in other Mario games suggests that they are particularly interested in people's responses about the new characters. They also ask which features of these, if any, are not liked. Now sadly, short of a Kensuke Tanabe bean-spinning interview, we're unlikely to learn what the data generated tells Nintendo, which is such a pity as I would love to see it. They also allow for an open-ended response on this though. Previously they made changes based on a generic survey result, and it may have even occurred to them that their interpretation was incorrect, so at least this time they're allowing people every chance to explain specifically why they don't like the parts they, well, don't like. Now, coming up is one of the most crucial questions. They ask specifically about balancing the battle mechanics and the world and story elements. Now I have to say, while I enjoy the Thousand Year Door's combat, I'm not sure challenging and diverse are the first two adjectives that come to mind when describing it. One wonders whether these particular descriptors were provided by the developers, or whether the marketing team behind this campaign plucked two likely adjectives from the sky to try to make the option sound equally appealing to the world and the story. Next is another question, and it's a variant of one we saw before with the pre-release polling. They're looking at characters again. Now, even though the Nintendo of America poll and this questionnaire were separate, I do feel like there is some coordination at play here. The pre-release questionnaire could test the appeal of characters based almost exclusively on aesthetics, except of course people who had already played the game, which is probably a relatively small number. The post-release questionnaire has a chance to identify how people responded to the characters after actually playing the game. Now, even the order they've chosen is kind of interesting. It's not alphabetical and it's not in order of appearance. It may just be random, but I remember seeing a poll once on the internet which had 4 identical response options, and what's intriguing was that even though the options were identical and you would expect the responses to all have roughly the same number of votes, since there was no particular difference to choose from, the first option had the most votes, the second had the second most votes, and so on. This had tens of thousands of votes, so it was a statistically significant reflection of the way that people will vote, giving mild preferential treatment to the top of a list. So putting Sir Grodus and Hooktail, a major new villain and perhaps the most iconic of the game's bosses, at the top might be seen to be subtly influencing the outcome. Of course, I have no problem with this, as I think all the characters in that top row are fantastic, but I don't imagine the survey designers wanted to skew their own survey, so did they take this ordering from somewhere, such as, say, the pre-release surveys? Or are they particularly interested in the response to these two villains? The next question yet again bashes the character angle, and in fact goes to the heart of what was long considered to be the major weakness of the Paper Mario series, that it adopted for anodyne tweaks of traditional Mario characters rather than surprising delighting with something new. Here they very clearly break it down into 3 boxes: the trad Mario characters, the unique twists on existing character types like Goombella, and the completely new characters like Madame Flurry and Lord Crump. How very interesting. They also ask about the challenge level of Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door, and now I start to wonder if Arlo literally wrote this survey. And then the final question compares your experience playing the game to your expectations, which, given the high expectations people had going in, could be a tricky one for the title, but I guess that's what you call a good problem to have. And finally, a regular question for these kinds of surveys, they ask you to show how likely you'd be to recommend this game to a friend. Incidentally, I think it's interesting they don't ask you to rate the game, but to recommend it. Fans being fans, if you ask people to rate something, my hunch is you'd likely to get lower scores, as they might obsess about some ultra-specific detail, whereas how likely you would be to recommend a game probably gets closer to people's actual satisfaction levels, because people wouldn't get bogged down by criticising tiny details, but would relate their general experience and love of the property. So that is the questionnaire that has just dropped, in Europe at least. If you want to see my similar video on the previous Paper Mario questionnaire, that's on screen at the moment, and I will be back soon with another video which looks at Nintendo's overall strategy with Paper Mario at the moment, and perhaps how it relates to Mario stories in general. For now though, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon for another Nintendo Forecast.